From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, I'm Rob Cairns. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, I have Mr. Tim Nash with me and his monthly security segment, and we're going to talk all about smartphone security. Grab a drink, sit back, relax, enjoy the show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Stunning Digital Marketing, the digital marketing concierge that helps you put all your marketing pieces together. We are your marketing experts. We are also your WordPress security experts and know how to lock down a website and protect yourself from bad actors. So contact us at Stunning Digital Marketing today. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. And today I'm here with my good friend from the UK, Mr. Tim Nash, and we're going to talk all about security. How are you today, Tim?
I'm doing all right, though it's been a very long day doing a very dull and tedious code review. So I'm quite excited to just talk for a little bit because I've had my head in code all day.
Has anything interesting come out of such code review? I have to ask.
Nothing that I can actually talk about too much, but yeah, no, it's always interesting. It was a really big project that the client had, and it was last minute and rushed. And it's fascinating to watch read these code reviews and go, yes, this is the point where the client pushed back. Yes, this is the bit where you got told you only had an hour to do the work in that should have taken 5. Yes, this is the bit you missed.
I hear you 100%, and I appreciate client confidentiality. That's what makes you first class. You're like me. You don't compromise that, and that's the way it goes. So, today's podcast is called kind of inspired by a book I was reading. So I'm going to show the book. It's hard to make out, but it's a book called Chasing Shadows, and the book is entitled in red, Cyber Espionage, Subversion, and the Global Fight for Democracy. How's that for a title? By a guy by the name of Ronald J. Tibert, who works with an organization that works with UT. He's was called Citizen Lab. He's done work with the White House, various governments. And where this is going is he talks about that the biggest security and privacy threat is this little device I'm holding in my hand.
I like the fact that it is blurred on the screen, like this little device that we're not going to tell you what it is.
Oh, we are.
Now your notifications are showing.
Yeah, I don't care about that. There's nothing showing on my notifications, but this is called a Samsung Galaxy Pixel, not Galaxy. It's a Pixel 9 smartphone. So, thoughts? Is the smartphone a problem?
I mean, yes.
Okay.
So, I mean, we start with the really basics that you have a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
I have a smartphone.
What do you have?
I actually have an iPhone.
Okay.
So I have an iPhone 14 Pro, so a few years old, but not that old. It still runs the latest versions of iOS. I have been only relatively new to owning an Apple phone. Previous to that, I was always running Android for the last N number of years, 10 plus years. And so this is the first iPhone I've had since like the original iPhone came out. And I chose it in part because of security worries with Android ecosystem, but also because I am slowly but surely going more into the Apple ecosystem. And you were talking about a smartphone being an issue, but actually on my wrist is my watch, which is a smartwatch.
You mean the one that's charging?
Yeah. Which obviously not only are we now talking about credit card details, passwords, email clients, etc. This thing is literally taking health data and pumping it into in this case into the Apple ecosystem. but for many people, just pumping those into the
Mine
cloud to
too.
be ingested by whoever. But we all have smartphones, and if we lose them, that's the keys to our castle completely gone. Uh, I don't know if it's the same in Canada, but certainly in the UK, there's been this huge push towards digital apps for banks, to
Yes.
the point that you can't actually, there are many banks now that do not have a website. It is just a vanity website. And the only way you can interact with the bank is through the banking app. They
Mine's
have
like
no
that.
physical locations or anything like that. They're referred to as challenger banks here in the UK, but they are basically, they've cut all their costs by putting all of their money into the into the development and the app side of things, rather than having physical presence or websites and other bits and pieces. The consequence of that is, if you lose your phone, you lose your bank account,
That's correct.
and that's terrifying.
Now, the other thing, if you lose your phone, you probably lose your authenticator app, which is just as bad. So, one of the things I did, I went through this a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I dropped my phone on a bus, and I didn't realize it till I got off such bus. So I did all the right things. I put a stop on the IMEI number, which you can do, which means no carrier will activate that phone. I also put a stop on the SIM card, which you can do. I got the phone back, I should tell you that. But the problem was, where do you think my Google Authenticator app was? On the phone. Now, I have since changed them. There is my Google Authenticator app. It's also on my iPad now. It's in two places.
I mean, until relatively, I mean, we are talking years, but until relatively recently, that wasn't possible with the Google Authenticator app, and
Yeah,
it was
and
only be on one device.
I will also tell you it is possible with the Microsoft Authenticator app. You can put it on two devices as well. So, and you say, why am I compromising security? Well, I'm the only one who uses the phone and the iPad, and having a backup is probably a good idea.
I mean, the other option is to look at getting a hardware key, something like a YubiKey,
Yep,
or
yep,
there are Fetian, which is a Chinese manufacturer, but there's a few of them. But if you're doing that and you live on your smartphone, make sure you get a one that's got NFC to do the tap on the back of the phone.
yep.
And then you can spend your life going and making silly noises as you're trying to tap somehow get the key in the right position to find the NFC reader on your phone,
Of course.
only to find that the key code gets put in twice because you double tapped it.
Yeah. So that's the route I've gone. I also have a YubiKey for other things. So, but that's how much the life is. And the biggest problem is, I don't know about you, but you use Apple Wallet. I certainly use my Google Wallet. I have
Yes, I mean, I use Apple Wallet. Now, interestingly, I don't use it on my watch, but I will use it on my phone,
me
and
too.
that's down to the way that the authentication works. Um, there are some things I don't like about. So there isn't a on the iPhone. There isn't a thumb reader,
Yep.
so you can't do thumbprints, which is weird because there are obviously some iPads that do that, and
Yes.
the uh, Mac MacBook Pro itself has a touch reader, but the iPhone doesn't. This means that you can opt for your Face ID, and I initially I was very much hesitant about Face ID, and I still am to a certain extent. But the main reason I'm hesitant is that I once obviously had to wear a face mask for COVID and bits, and with post COVID, I had a cough, so I wore a face mask and went to open my phone, and it just opened. At which point, my brain went, "This facial recognition is a bit worrying when you can
Yep.
obscure 2/3 of your face and it can still open up it." Um, you can also there's been loads of demonstrations where someone's printed somebody's face off on a photo and it's opened to various devices.
Yes,
But so I'm much more, so if I want to use my wallet, it is a double click to get it to get to the opening than it is a put the passcode in and then tap on the device.
that's
But
the
I
way
still
mine
find that
is.
more convenient than getting to my wallet, pulling my
Yes.
wallet out, finding the card, tapping or putting the card in. And it does, it is a convenience thing versus, and that's all, everything with security, it's that compromise. Do you want something that is convenient, and are you willing to accept that convenience? And are you willing to accept that there's a risk to that convenience?
Yep.
Here, the your Apple bits are normally capped to a fixed amount. It's normally about £100. You can go over with certain stores and bits, but on the whole, it's relatively low capped. And so there is a worst case scenario if your phone is stolen, they could get to that. But I think if my phone is stolen, there is bigger problems. And if they can get in, if they can get in, then they do have lots of access, though not as much as hopefully they could do. For example, within the newer stuff with the iOS, you can set individual passwords for applications.
Yep.
So you can specify, I would like this application to have a passcode, and I would like it to be different to the passcode than it is to get into my phone, which is a really nice feature.
Mhm. Now, one of the things you and I have talked about is, if you recall back 3 or 4 months, I went through issues where Google actually charged my debit card, not even my credit card, my debit card, which comes right into your bank account, um, money for ads that I never ran. And I had to fight with Google, which they turned around and refunded and Yeti. And surprisingly, they haven't shut down my Gmail account or any such things. But
I think at the time that was I was like, you're just gonna lose your account.
so what I ended up doing was I no longer have a debit card in my wallet. I need something there to pay for transit passes because they're in the Google Wallet. So I've actually I went out and got a credit card with a low credit limit on purpose, which I tossed in my Google Wallet. So
See, I use something slightly different in that I have attached to my Google Wallet is a virtual card,
yeah,
and that virtual card has a limit on it, so
we
that I
don't
can
we
get.
don't have those in Canada,
Uh,
unfortunately.
well, when you come into the 21st century with the rest of us, you too can
Thank
have
you.
this.
Thank you, Tim. So that's problem number one. Problem number two and is geolocation service. And I have to go there because one of the things I spend a lot of time educating kids. And one of the things we teach kids and parents of kids under 18 is, if you're going to give your child under 18 a smartphone, I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, but each to his own. Make sure you turn off the geolocation services, because we've seen cases where kids have been followed, bullied, beat up, etc., etc., etc. And we always say, how did they know? Well, they had geolocation services on their pictures turned on everything turned on. And that's a bit of a privacy nightmare, isn't it?
I mean, again, this comes down to the individual devices, and this is a good example again where the Android versus iOS debate can come in. iOS out of the box. Now, Android. The thing about Android is you can customize it, and when we're talking about Android, it's stock Android, and you can get things like Graphene OS or
Yep.
and it's the ilk which are come with really good lockdown defaults. But by default, Android OS is particularly lax about things like and Google just wants to hoover up data. Let's face it, that's their job. They are all consuming. They want your data, and this is why they made Android in the first place. Please don't sue us, Google lawyers. iOS is a little bit more privacy focused, and so things like the photos that metadata, you can't by default put that metadata on. You have to actively go through and add the location on there.
Yep.
And I would argue that actually location tracking for kids is a good example where you, as a parent, certainly you have to weigh that up of do you want to know if little Jimmy's fallen down the well and where the well is,
Yep.
versus will little Jimmy do something stupid and broadcast his location to the
Yep.
entire world? And that comes down to education. I think it's important that these two things balance out. And I wouldn't
I
immediately
agree.
say don't turn this on, but it's more we need to learn how these work. And I think it's important to know, for little Jimmy to know that his mum and dad are watching him if that's the case,
Yeah,
because the biggest problem, without turning this into parenting advice, which I'm not the person to give out, but that whenever you have these sort of things, education is always the way forward, and honesty
I
is always.
agree. I've done a lot of work over the last 20 years educating in conjunction with police forces, educators, kids on how to enact online, and smartphones is an extension of that. And I don't believe that putting checks and balances in place is the right way for parents to go. I believe having those conversations, creating trust and a dialogue at home. Again, I'm not giving parent advice, but from a technology standpoint, I think is a much better route to go than saying you can't have this, because you know what? The minute you do that, they run to a friends, they run to a coffee shop, they find another device, they buy a device that you don't know they have, and it's off the grid, and then we got a whole new set of problems. So I agree with you. Education is key, always.
I have a friend who's got a teenager and who is going through it at the moment, with the teenager making bad choices when it comes to not anything scary in the world, just bad choices in like staying up late and playing games and chatting all night long with their friends, sort of thing. And they went down the route of, well, we're going to lock down their device.
Good
Next
idea. No,
night, same problem. They got past the lock. They got past. Eventually, they were going like, "Well, we've locked down the via DNS." Da, da, da. And eventually, they came and said, "Well, what would you do?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not. I'd talk to your kid and say, stop doing that. It's hurting you." But outside of that, they were like, "Well, what would you do?" It's like, I would take the internet router and unplug it.
yes,
And they were like, "Yeah, but then we wouldn't be able to get on." It's like, maybe
yeah,
you shouldn't be online at 3 in the morning.
that is true. So the other thing this book talks about, and this is the scary, we're seeing more and more scams through things like WhatsApp vulnerabilities, Telegram vulnerabilities, often nation state actors causing these problems. So the average person is probably not going to be targeted, but who knows? And it's not the typical phishing scam where you have to click on a link. He talks about one case where one of the WhatsApp vulnerabilities, what was happening was they'd make a fake call, and then the call would disappear from your call list. So you never knew you got the call. But the minute you answered that call, the payload got invoked. Should we be concerned about stuff like that? Or for the average person, should they just say, not me?
So there is a well-known Israeli company called the NSA Group,
That's
who
who is
are,
involved in this one.
yeah, I was gonna say that sounded very much like them, and they make basically the zero-day vulnerabilities for state
Yep.
actors.
Yep.
Now the thing about zero-day vulnerabilities is they're really effective at that 0 day.
Mhm.
But unless a manufacturer is deliberately and willfully letting it get past, which there are some people would argue that could be the case, most of the time they will then get patched. If I have a vulnerability that I know will get my target, and I've just spent millions of pounds developing it as a nation state, I'm not going to necessarily want script kiddie A having access to it until I've used it the way I want it.
Yeah, of
And by
course.
the time script kiddie A's got it, everything should be patched. But that doesn't mean that there aren't plenty of phones that are going to be susceptible. And one of the big problems in the ecosystems is when the phone update just don't stop receiving updates. Quite a lot of the more broader Android devices, they tend to be you've got the stock Android, but you've also got like OnePlus has their is it Oxygen OS? Has their
Yes.
Oxygen OS, which is
Yeah.
just Android with a different skin on it.
Mhm.
And there's plenty of these other examples of these phones, and they have relatively short life cycles for the operating system.
Usually 2 or 3 years, where I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I should know because I got a Pixel 9 beside me. I think the Pixel's up to 5 or 6, and I think
Yeah.
Samsung is right behind them. Um,
Yeah, I think that from what I remember from back in the Android days, you really needed a Pixel, a Samsung, and I'm trying to think of the other one that was on that list to be get those sort of long-term releases
yeah,
that
and the
were
other
certainly
thing,
comparable to the iOS ones, which were again 5 to 7 years sort of
yeah,
length.
and the other thing about the Pixel phones is their agreement with the carriers is what typically happens is updates get held back by the carriers sometimes. So Samsung will put up an update, and the consumer, I don't know how it works in the UK and Canada, might not see that update for another month on top of the update. With Pixel updates and iPhone updates, contractually, they're not allowed to hold them back. So they come out right away. So one of the reasons I've leaned towards the Pixel phone, besides the fact I worked and live in a Google universe, lucky me. Good or bad, I'm not sure, but that judgment's out. But I get my updates right away. There can be some drawbacks. For example, we all know what happened with the Pixel 4a and the battery last month, do we not? Google in their world put out an Android update, and all the 4a owners that updated kiboshed their batteries. That happened to a friend of mine.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So the battery went from charging to 100% to 20%, and you were charging a battery 5 times a day. And all Google did was basically offer $50 or $100 rebate on the new phone, or say go away. And, that was the end of that. And their
Oh,
argument was,
I
and
mean,
their
Pixel
argument,
4a is 4.5 years old, so
that was their argument. You got it. So there's that side of it too about pushing updates right away. Um, I would say if you're really concerned about updates, over me, I'd be going an iPhone or a Pixel every time.
yeah, I mean the one thing about the iPhone is obviously their updates are completely controlled by Apple, not the carriers. I don't
That's right.
think the carriers have any way of controlling it. Um, this is positive, I guess. It's a negative as well. Apple could also the iPhone is very much a closed network. You are sacrificing what you gain in. Okay, the iOS is a much more polished device, has probably the best out of the box privacy settings of the commercially available without you
Yes,
starting to work on them devices. What you lose is the customization, the
yes,
flexibility, and ultimately the control.
yes,
Because I keep saying iOS is one of the most privacy focused today, but they also have automatic updates that can over the air that can pump that literally can turn that into something completely different. All it would take is for Apple to go, we really like the way Google's been doing their stuff. Why don't we
Here,
become Google?
here you go.
And there we go. And instantly it's like, oh, our revenue's down. We could really do with a subscription model's not working for us. Let's just start selling customer data because we have access to it. And they could, on a flip of a switch, do it. Now, I think amongst their client base, there would be an open revolt. And
Yes,
it's not something that I can see them doing in the short to medium term. But even over the last few years, they have started to make compromises on their very, very strict privacy statements and the very strict way that, like, no, we will not go. Everything will be privacy focused. And you only have to look at some of the Apple Intelligence features, which are like, oh, yes. And if we can't manage it on the phone, we'll silently dump it over to our data center. And it's like, well, hang on a minute, you promised everything would be done on the phone, and it's like, well, it was more of a we'll try.
yeah.
So things like that. So there, even within that ecosystem, there's creep out. But yeah, if you unless you are managing the device yourself, and you can do an Android phone, and particularly a Pixel phone, if you don't want a Google on your Pixel phone, you can install something called Graphene OS, which I've mentioned a couple of times, which is a privacy focused operating system based on Android.
Yeah.
But things like the Play Store have been stripped out, and then you can get it back in a sandbox so that it can't see the rest of your phone, which means that you can install apps like, I don't know, Google Maps, for example, and Google Maps would not have any access to your contacts. Now, you might think that seems perfectly reasonable, but by default, Google Maps on an Android will go, oh, I've got your entire contacts list now. And when
It
you look on
does.
the map, it will go, there's Ben's house. And you'll think, oh, that's really good. But of course, all of that data got fed into the cloud. So Google now knows there's Ben's house.
So true. What I would say, this Android versus iPhone debate's never going to go away. I'm not a big fan of these debates, I got to tell you. But one of the things I always say is for seniors and for non-technical people, go get an iPhone, please. And I'm an Android user. So I look at my partner, Tiz. Tiz is not technical. She's had an iPhone for years. She just upgraded a year and a half ago. Her father has an iPhone. Her sister has an iPhone. My son, who doesn't like doing technical stuff, has an iPhone. My 80-year-old mother, who doesn't like doing stuff, has an iPhone. And what do I have? An Android, because that's the way it is.
I mean, it is very much down to preference, and yeah,
Yep.
I'm not sure whether when this phone when I get to the sort of end of life for this phone, which is probably going to be in a couple of years' time, I tend to rotate through at about 5 to 6 years mark. I don't know whether I'll go back to go carry on with my phone or an Android, but I have to say I've had a lot less problems. But I'm wondering if that's because I'm finally using it as it's meant to be used, as
Yes.
a just
Phone.
a device, and I'm
Yes.
not tinkering with it in
Well,
any
that's
way.
that's probably it too. It's funny. I just went to the Pixel 9 2 weeks ago. I upgraded from the Pixel 7. Oops. And there's a convoluted story there, but I won't get into in this podcast, but that's another story for another day. And when I did the upgrade, one of the things I did was I have no notifications showing on this phone except for text messages from certain people and phone calls from certain people, and everything else is screened. And everybody all of a sudden hates me because I have become so hard to get a hold of again. So,
Yes, silencing notifications. Now, if we can I think actually it's not nothing to do with operating systems. If we can
yes,
just get notifications turned off, then our phones would be a lot better places.
yes, they would. So we're talking about phones. So we've talked a little bit about security updates. We've talked about a little bit about other stuff. Um, And as we go, speaking of phones, guess what's ringing in the background, which I'm going to go nowhere near. But anyway, we've talked about all that stuff. Um, and we've talked about some vulnerabilities like WhatsApp and banking concerns and wallet concerns. What else should you be aware of with your phone?
So we've talked about the sort of like the general banking bits. A couple of things that are obvious is that if you have your email on your phone, then if you've got email and you've got sensitive information going to your
Yeah.
phone, we certainly notifications, but actually you can on whichever operating system you're choosing, you can control what notifications are shown
Yep,
to the screen when it is locked.
that's correct.
And so I'm always amazed when I pick up someone's locked phone and go, huh, really? That colonoscopy? Oh dear, poor them. As you're sort of scrolling through their notifications on their locked phone. So, um, at least for me, if I know that if it's a communication channel, I make a point that it doesn't. It can show that I have a notification on the lock screen, but it shouldn't say what that notification is and who it's from, because that's information that somebody other than I don't need to know at the lock screen what that notification is,
Yeah.
because if I'm expecting the notification, I will open my phone, and if I need to read the notification, I have to open my phone anyway to action it. So it makes no sense to have that information publicly available. So that's one thing I would think of. The other thing is we again alluded to contacts. Your contacts list is something that you've grown over many times. I wonder how many people have now. This may be a good time that for Google to step in and say, "Hey, we do this for you." But if you're storing your contacts on your SIM card, then when you lose your phone, you will not have access to those contacts because you'll have lost them. Now,
That's
most
correct.
modern phones by default do not store to the SIM card. Instead, they store to the
Thank
cloud,
God. Yeah.
which is a pro and a con, because obviously you've just given that data to somebody, be it Apple, be it Google, be it a third party if you're using a third party service. Something that I've seen a lot of recently is a lot of these third party will sync your contacts amongst different devices, your Apple device and your Android
Yeah.
device, and they're all really bad. And they all involve stealing your contacts and holding them
Of
in
course.
hostage somewhere. So don't use those apps. If you see anything that's like, oh yeah, we can transfer your contacts, or we can convert your contacts. I can't remember why I wanted it, but I was looking for something that would store my contacts as Cal contact, the old CalDev style contact B cards, so that I could utilize them in multiple places. And yeah, the amount of scammy, horrible apps I found, it was
Oh,
terrifying.
it's awful. Yep. Yep.
Which I guess leads on to scammy, horrible, terrifying apps, and people just downloading any old crap to their phones, and then wondering why their phones are slow and why where their data's gone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And while we're at it, the biggest app that everybody's downloaded to their phones lately is this new AI app from China. You know which one I'm talking.
Is
DeepSeek.
it ChatGPT?
Yeah. And the biggest problem with DeepSeek is privacy. Where is all your information going? Back to
I,
China.
I would point out that it's replaced ChatGPT, and the biggest problem with ChatGPT is
It's privacy.
privacy and where's
Yeah.
all your data gone?
Yeah.
Uh,
I would too.
I'm not sure when you're the little person who it does. There are differences between sort of like data going to the United States versus data going to China,
Of
but when
course.
you're the tiny little person, ultimately your data is not yours anymore and is gone to whoever, where, in whatever, whenever you're installing these sort of things. I've seen a lot of press about DeepSeek and people going through its terms and conditions and going, "Oh my God, insert, they can do this with your data." And it always makes me laugh because it's a bunch of people who, if you then went, "Yes, but those are the same terms and conditions as ChatGPT,"
Yep.
because there's a reasonable chance that DeepSeek just copied it,
Yes. One of
including the terms and conditions.
one of the things I would hazard anybody to do, and Apple's been taken to hit a task on this, and it's not Apple's fault. Johnny has a heart attack and dies. And the only way into his phone is facial recognition. And Mary, his wife, wants into that phone to get some information. She can't get in. And she calls Apple, and Apple says, go away because we're privacy focused. What I would suggest is, even if you're going to use facial recognition or a fingerprint, you might want to set up a passcode and store it in an envelope in your safety deposit box in a safe. I know in my case, I've got it in a safe in the house that says if something happens to me, open this envelope. There's other things in there like Bitward and passwords and, other interesting stuff. But the
Now,
point,
just to check, where is the safe exactly in your house?
I'm not helping you with that one because this is a live podcast. That's not going there, and it doesn't look like it's safe. So that ain't gonna help
Oh,
you.
okay, right. Just did that. And
But the point I'm making is make sure somebody can get into that device that you trust besides you in case something happens. So in my case, my partner Tiz, and it's a running joke. We have no secrets. So she'll pick up my phone without even asking me, key the PIN number in and go find what she wants. Because I have nothing to hide. But there are people who have a lot to hide, i.e., James, who's got a mistress and is hiding his phone from his significant other. And
just to check, do I know James?
no, you
Are
do
we going to
not.
have a conversation after this call about James?
No, we're not. We're not. So, but the point I'm making is if you've got nothing to hide, you should be able to trust somebody with a backup to get into your phone. And it's actually a good idea.
I'm going to sort of counter this,
Oh,
and
you are,
I'm going to go a little bit dark, I'm afraid.
okay.
If you are in a position where you have a phone that you need to make sure that nobody does know it's there, throughout, and if it's especially if it is an Apple phone or a modern Android phone that's running an up-to-date version of Android OS, most Western governments have access to an emergency broadcast system that
Yep,
will allow you to send alerts to the phone for natural disasters, acts
that's
of
correct.
stuff. Um, Now, when those messages are sent, the phones make a very loud beeping noise
They
and put
do.
the message to the screen.
Yes,
In some cases, they'll do that when it's in sleep and even when it's turned off if there is a battery associated with it.
that's correct.
So if you are, and this is potentially if you're a victim of domestic violence, but also if you were having an affair and wishing to hide your burner phone, you might within the settings you can go into the settings and disable
Yes,
emergency alerts. Now, obviously, don't do that if it's your primary phone because they are vaguely useful. You might want to know whatever they're being alerting. But if you have that secondary phone that you need to keep secret, the last thing you want to do while there is an emergency going on is having to explain to somebody where your second phone is from. So
yes,
this came to mind because of last year in the UK we had this whole nationwide test alert test part of rolling out this system. And we did a lot of work ahead of time to try and encourage people in exactly that scenario to turn off their phones and to turn off the settings and tell them that turning off the phone might not be enough. And sadly, there was a noticeable statistical spike in domestic violence in
yes,
the week following, which makes the fact that that message didn't get pushed out. So if you know anybody who you think might need to have a second phone or that they might need a second phone and they need to be secret, do them a favor, help them configure it and turn
yep,
that off.
yep. And the other problem is because these are tracking devices and in the iPhone case in conjunction with an AirTag, they have a lot of great uses. Android also has an equivalent to the AirTags now, which I
Mm-hmm.
actually put one in a piece of luggage when I travel. So if my luggage goes away, I can find it. But the other security side of that is what happens if I put the AirTag in my spouse's car who I'm trying to control? You got to look at the other side of it, right?
Yeah, and well, again, both Apple and Android have made this effort to try and fix this sort of.
Yep.
You can't truly fix it. You know, the Apple's first attempt was, oh well, we've put a speaker in it. So if the iTag's gone out of your range for or your given location for more than a day, it will start to beep, and people just opened it up and unplugged the speaker. It's like, oh, and then they were like, well, okay, we'll notify people around you. And it's like, yeah, but all you need to do is to have uh, a spouse who you travel with backwards and forwards regularly enough that they'll get the notification
Yep.
a couple of times, then they'll ignore it the next time they see it. So
Yes.
these things, wherever we have something that's designed for good, it's inevitably somebody is going to abuse it. I really like my AirTags, and for personally, they're really useful for me to track my luggage. I have one in a couple of other places that I use for that sort of tracking, and it works so well.
Yeah,
But
my mom uses one exactly for the same reason. At 80, when she flies, she knows exactly where her luggage is, exactly how, and it solves problems like you wouldn't believe.
yeah, I mean, it's even if it's something as silly and as a very first world problem as going when you get to the bag carousel, going, oh, I need to be on this one because you can just see where your bag is. Because in an airport, it's probably there are enough devices around that you can
Yeah,
pinpoint more or less to within a couple of meters.
yeah,
But that comes at a cost. And right back at the beginning of this, we talked about the idea that phones are convenience versus security and compromise,
yep.
and AirTags are exactly that. If we allow them to exist because they're convenient, which we have done, we are also accepting the risk that they will be abused. But I would argue that GPS trackers have been a thing in every spy movie, and there is a spy shop on the outskirts of Leeds that I've always wanted to go into because it looks just like the
Yeah,
shadiest
yeah.
place possible. But you could buy a GPS tracker for not pennies, but not that much more than an AirTag, and people have been able to do this for a very long time.
Yeah, that's what happens when we watch Bond, James Bond. It's and that said, I'm such a fan. So, and it always shocks people. Like I'll be out with Tiz, and she'll pick my phone up off the table and say, "I need to check something." She won't ask, and she'll just, and people will look at me and say, "Did she just log in your phone?" Yeah, she did, because I don't have a security. I have a trust. Back to our whole conversation around security and trust. I don't have that issue. She can log into my phone. There's nothing there. She can do what she wants on my phone. There's nothing there.
And because Rob doesn't ever buy her any presents, she can always have a wander through his email.
Yeah, thank you very much. What are those charges? As we wrap up, three quick takeaways to make the person secure with their phone. What are they?
uh,
Put you on the spot if I can.
yeah, you have. Make sure your phone is actually up to date. Is
Yep.
number one. Quite often, phones automatically update at night. So make sure your phone is plugged in and charging at points where it can get an update. It is very easy for you to miss 2 or 3 updates on your phone. If you are taking your phone out and about into public, you should have a decent security lock on it.
Yep.
Um, Whether that be facial recognition, but always have a backup ID passcode going through. And number 3 is if it doesn't need to be on your phone, don't put it on your phone. I think actually we haven't touched that at all, but actually I think that's a really useful piece of advice. If your work emails don't need to be on your phone, don't put them on your phone. Both for your better life, but also for better security. Anything we don't need on our phones, the better they're gonna be.
So true. One of the reasons aside, I do not have any social media on my phone anymore. So there you go.
Nor do I.
Yes.
It is a very strange feeling.
There's a,
What else?
there's a bet going on right now with my other half and some friends on how long this little experiment is going to last. We're at
How long has it lasted?
14 days and counting.
Oh, okay. Oh, a
Yes.
youngster. I think I gave up Twitter about 3 years ago on my phone, and I was much better for it. And then I stopped. And yeah, I've been very good. Things like Blue Sky. Even briefly, I had LinkedIn on to upload some videos, but I took it off immediately afterwards. And yeah, I feel much better for it. It's one of the nice things not having that on my phone.
Yeah. Have to ask them, do you have any workshops coming up, or are you still in workshop hold mode?
I'm still in workshop hold mode. I'm actually mid prepping to do some recording. So next week I'm actually sitting down to do some recordings
Awesome.
so that should all be coming out towards the end of March, April time. but yeah, I thankfully swamped with work, though that is coming to an end. So if people want to hire me, they are more than welcome to.
And how did they get a hold of you to hire you?
Timnash.co.uk. If you go there, you can get hold of me, book a call. Love to have a chat with you. I do all sorts of things that tend to be WordPress security, but not necessarily WordPress. But yeah, I do site and code reviews for people, and I'm finding I'm doing more and more compliance stuff at the moment, which is a mixed bag. I sort of like it, sort of don't.
Yeah, it depends on the flavor of the day, right, Tim?
Yes,
As,
indeed.
as always, my friend, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. Appreciate you.
See you next month.
Bye bye. This podcast has been brought to you by Stunning Digital Marketing, your digital marketing concierge to help the business owner put all his pieces together, whether it's email marketing, WordPress security, WordPress design and development, PPC, and more. Text Stunning Digital Marketing for all your digital marketing needs today. A very special thank you to Tim Nash for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much every day. My mother, Ann Cairns, who's still doing really well and is an inspiration. And of course, Tiz Maroney. And Tiz, I know I've said it, but thank you so much for all the inspiration you give me every day.